Hi, we're going to talk today about how to increase your word count. This is something that I address in my Comp 1 classes and in my Comp 2 classes on a fairly regular basis. Students will often say, I can't reach my word count, or they'll just give up and turn in something that's 750 words long when their assignment goal was 1,000 words. So I created a handout that I go over with them and I give to them. I don't have any copyright on it. It is here to help. It is here to be a blessing. And I go over it with them. And I thought, what a great opportunity for me, not just to share it with students, but to share it across the board. And so we're going to take a little bit of time here and we're going to take a look at how to increase your word count. I have come up with 4 means of effectively increasing your word count, and I'm going to screen share and walk you through the 4 points that I've come up with for effective means of increasing your word count. So let me open up the file that I'm looking for. Here it is. Here we are. This is How to Increase Your Word Count by Daisha Cunningham. Some information that I have collected in my time teaching composition classes at a college level. So let's jump into this. How to increase your word count. Number 1, be descriptive. I find very often students will write a very dry essay. Most of the time, that's because they're not excited about the topic. They're not really particularly into writing that particular type of essay. And so what they write isn't something they care about. And because of that, they tend not to be descriptive. We add some description into our writing and our word count increases. It can increase exponentially. So let's read some of the items here underneath be descriptive. There are 2. So let's read these 2 items underneath be descriptive. Utilize the rule of 3s. For any item that needs describing, if your reader must know how that chair looks or how this thing smells or what that bird sounds like, describe it. Use the 5 senses to create a description, but give the items being described no more than 3 bits of description each. 3 bits. Don't overwhelm them, but don't underwhelm them either. And you'll find this same writing advice. You read this author's book on writing or that author's book on writing or this textbook about writing and being descriptive. You're going to see this rule of 3s on a consistent basis. And so anytime you're looking at a particular item, let's say I pick up my little stapler here, right? Anybody recognize the red swing line, right? But if you were going to describe this particular stapler to an audience who cannot see it, you would want to say something along the lines of, it's red, it's heavy, it's my swing line. That's 3 bits of description. I don't need to give more than that. The rest of it, the audience can fill in for themselves. We let them use their imaginations, but we cannot leave out description when things need described. I think sometimes as writers, we forget. We assume that the reader knows what it is that we're looking at. We assume the reader knows what it is that we hear. We assume the reader knows what we feel. And so we don't remember, let's put it that way, that we need to describe these things. We need to give bits of description using the 5 senses. And so that's how we increase our word count. That's one way, is by being descriptive. Imagine that your reader is ignorant, right, of what you know, because most often your reader is, in fact, ignorant of what you know. I mean, it doesn't mean they're stupid. It means they don't know what you know. They are without information, the actual definition there of ignorance. So never assume that they know what you're seeing in your own mind. You cannot assume that. And so we need to be descriptive. It adds to your word count. Who doesn't want to add to their word count? I do. Okay, number 2, include examples. Use stories and statistics. tell stories. Think about politicians, preachers, motivational speakers, professors, engaging professors. They tell stories. It's what we do. It's how we make our points stronger. We use examples. And so you need to be doing that same thing in your writing. You add a story, you increase your word count. Let's say you're at 750, the story's about 400 words. Hello, now you're at 1150. What are you going to do? You got to narrow it down. You could take out some other words in paragraph 2 that don't need to be there because the story is strong and the story is a parable. The story makes the point. And oftentimes they do. So to strengthen an idea, use stories, which pathos, you want to stir the emotions, and statistical information, data, things that are logos based, they're logic based. We use those things as examples to increase not only our argument's character and strength, but our word count too. Win! Oh, what a win! I like it. Do you like it? I like it. Number 3, use a signal phrase for all quotes and paraphrases. So when you're writing at a college level, you have to quote outside sources. You have to quote academic sources. You can quote them, you can paraphrase them. One way or the other, you're going to be using outside sources to construct your arguments in a college setting and sometimes outside of a college setting. So how can we increase our word count? Well, every time you're going to use quoted material or paraphrased material, give it a signal phrase. Ta-da! Now, what do I mean by a signal phrase? You need to set up that quote. Tell who said it and why that person's important to listen to. Why does the opinion of that individual have any bearing whatsoever on the argument that you're making? Again, assume your reader's ignorance. They're not going to know. And if you don't tell them why they should listen to this individual that you're quoting, they're just going to gloss over that, chances are. So we use a signal phrase. So let's go ahead and read what's on the handout. To strengthen your argument, random quotes carry little to no weight. If you explain who said what's coming and why their word is important, all of a sudden, the quote carries weight to your argument. Here's an example. Stephen King, author of many short stories, including The Man Who Loved Flowers, gave an example of repetition in that particular short story that is bone-chilling. He wrote, and he swung the hammer, swung the hammer, swung the hammer, as he had done 5 other times. You tell who said it and why that person's word is important. If they are, let's say, there's an article that I share with my students written by a guy named Dan Schwabel, right? I just pulling his name out of the air because I'm familiar with the article. He put together an article called Hire for Attitude. And in that, he interviews a man named Mark Murphy, who is a Fortune 500 leadership training individual. And so if I was to just say, oh, you should read Hire for Attitude, in there it says that they tracked 20,000 new hires over a period of 18 months. And at the end of that 18 months, 46% of those people were no longer employed. 89% of the time that those 46% were no longer employed, it was because they had an attitude problem. Now, if I just quoted that information at you and I didn't tell you that Dan Schwabel is a journalist for Forbes magazine and that Mark Murphy leads training sessions for Fortune 500 companies, those statistical points, that entire study doesn't really carry much weight. That's information I could have just made up, pulled out of thin air. But if I give it a signal phrase, if I tell you that Dan Schwabel put together this article for Forbes magazine, he interviewed Mark Murphy, who has written a book called Hire for Attitude about the leadership training that he does and the fact that emotional intelligence is what employers are looking for in the workplace. And then I share the quote. All of a sudden, the quoted material means more And I've increased my word count. Woohoo, yeah, super exciting. Another reason why we use a signal phrase is to mark boundaries, especially if we're using paraphrased materials. Okay, so signal phrases mark boundaries between your words and the source's words. Sometimes I get real confused when I'm grading essays. If a student hasn't used a signal phrase, I don't know where this leaves off and that begins. And then all of a sudden, they've got an MLA parenthetical citation. And I'm going, hmm, what you quoting there, bub? Or what you paraphrasing there? I can't quite tell. So we use a signal phrase to mark boundaries. By marking the boundaries, you also provide a smooth transition for the reader between your words and the source. And you increase your word count. Oh, yes. So we also want to emphasize our sources. And this goes along with both of the ones before it. We want to call attention to the author or the source being used. In some cases, such as a literature review or the use of a well-known author, specific information about the source is important for the reader to know. Give adequate and specific details regarding the source because this adds to its credibility. You want to make a strong argument, make sure that your sources are credible. Give them credibility by giving your reader, your audience, the information that they need in order to understand the research that you've done is credible. And drum roll, it increases your word count. It's a win. Also, it helps us avoid plagiarism. So all source material has to be cited, and signal phrases are one way to cite a source. However, additional citation formatting may be necessary depending on your citation style. Signal phrases are used with in-text citations in MLA formatting. Now, I'm not as familiar with APA because I teach English classes. I'm teaching in the humanities. We use MLA. And so in MLA, you have to have both. If you are having a signal phrase, you still need your MLA parenthetical citation at the end of all paraphrased material and all quoted material. But that's okay. Right? Because we're increasing our word count. So it's a win. And I think that's exciting. Now, number 4. What is number 4? Number 4, this is massive. This is just like huge. Woo! Love it. Include opposing perspectives in your argument. Ah, yes. You want to make a strong argument, include opposing perspectives inside of it. Let's read the bullet points because I'm going to talk all over the place unless I stick to the handout. I can make this handout last like an hour. We don't want it to last an hour right now, but it could. But we want to create an effective argument, so we include opposing perspectives. This can double your word count. Double. You're going to say, it is my opinion based upon research that XYZ is true. And then you want to include, however, some researchers believe PDQ is the answer because, and give a reason, give some validity to the opposing perspective because that shows that you are fair, which increases your word count and the strength of your argument. So it's a win all the way around. When your reader sees that you understand the opposing side, that you admit there is an opposing side, and that you can combat with your words and your research, you can lay it out. Here's what they believe. And yet, here's what I believe based upon my research. And you comparison contrast. Like, they believe this, I believe this because. And you go back and forth. Increases your word count, strengthens your argument, shows that you know what you're talking about. That's a giant win for you. Strengthens your argument. It builds credibility, ethos. When you, the writer, are willing to admit that there are indeed other perspectives than your own. If you want to be an effective arguer, you have to be able to admit that there are indeed perspectives other than your own. I mean, we live on a planet with 8 billion people. Very rarely do we actually all believe something similar. So there are going to be people who have opposing perspectives. And how do we communicate well with them? Well, we admit that opposing perspectives exist. That makes us fair. That makes us teachable. It also makes us work harder to be able to prove our own opinions and our own thoughts, which is all wrapped up under the umbrella of critical thinking. And that, my friends, is what we should all be aiming for. Then the last one here, it says, state what the opposing perspective is and argue it in the paper, combating it with your own research and opinion. Show that you understand the opposing perspective by the seriousness with which you treat the addition of that information into your essay. Let your own argument meet the opposing perspective at every point. This is exciting. It makes you credible, and it can take a paper that was too short and double it in size. It strengthens your argument and you meet your goal. It's a win. So I highly recommend that you consider these points, begin to incorporate them into your writing, whether it is for your college classes, your high school classes, whatever it is that you're going to be using it for. You're writing a memo for work or a letter for work and you need more words. Here are some wonderful ways to accomplish that for your argument's sake. So I highly encourage you to think about how to increase your word count by being descriptive, including examples, stories, and statistics, using signal phrases for all quotes and paraphrases, and including opposing perspectives in your argument. These are wins for you when it comes to your argument. And that's what we want to be working towards. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you find it beneficial. I will have this listed. I'm going to have the video on YouTube, and I will have this on my blog as well. If you were to look up how to increase your word count and look for Linnaeus' Life on WordPress, you will find this article. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope you found this helpful. See you next time.